little bit more, and maybe I'll relax a little bit because I won't be worried about what I'm missing, but it's because I'm getting old. I've been in financial aid since 1989. That's my true confession to you about how I'm just presenting. It's not my presentation.
I've heard that a number of times since you've been.
All right, packaging and award notification. We're going to explain the principles involved in packaging federal, state, college, and outside financial aid, because it all goes on the same thing, right? And to provide an overview of different packaging models. How many of you are awarding students already in your subject? Ooh, so this is not a lot. We might have some good questions and some good conversation about this. Good. All right, each school must design and publish packaging policies suited for their institution, their student population, and their philosophy. And there are differences between schools and their philosophies. And the kinds of schools that you all have make it different too. Community colleges versus state schools versus the privates. There is a difference in what we need to do to attract our students and retain them. And everybody knows that a lot of times financial aid and what the student's getting and what they're not getting is the closer for whether they come to your school. So the better your packaging policy to take care of your students and get them there, the better. Okay? Aid administrators should consider requirements for all programs available at the institutions. Some programs are considered entitlements. Other programs have unique rules and regulations, like our North Carolina programs that you all have, right? The private schools have the big scholarships. Do they still call it the North Carolina Community College Grant? Colleges? And what do they call it like at NC State? What's it called? NC Grants? Something like that? Anyway, we all have those. Something like that. Aid administrators are responsible for being aware of all the estimated financial aid, including all outside aid for a student. So it's an important part of this process to make sure that students are sharing all of their resources with you, which can be tricky sometimes, right? They don't always tell us. Knowing whether a student is receiving an alternative loan, even though federal aid may not have certified them, financial aid has not certified the loan, this could require coordination with other campus officials like the business office. It's a really good example, the alternative ones, of why it's important to have that relationship with the business office. Because sometimes they get resources on their side that we don't know about. And the one that comes to mind for me more than any of them are outside scholarships. Family has a check in their hand, students getting ready to move into the housing on move-in day or whatever you all call it, and they hand business office a check for a scholarship. The business office doesn't share that information with you. That's a resource that you're not counting in their eligibility. That's the biggest one on my campus. Does anyone else have a big one they're thinking about? We could do tuition forms too at the last minute. Maybe you get it, but our heads so we can fill them out so that. But if the money comes to our institution from due, and we don't know about it from the business office, we just went out of compliance in about 2 seconds. So even though the business office and financial aid, there's a nice checks and balance there that makes things a challenge sometimes for all of us. It's really important to keep that communication.
Yes. Another thing that created a struggle for us in Virginia, because it matters whether it's federal or state, that's the other all counts. And so that's, I was on the business office side, and that was really something I had to touch base with, financial aid vouchers on those checks.
Yes, they're called outside resources or third-party payments. Those of you that use Colleague, there's a third-party or sponsorship functionality that the accounts receivable side has that they can be using. So between that and communications with them, that will help. But that is one of the biggest things I've found is a challenge to keep up with. So packaging is the process of finding the best combination of aid to meet students' financial needs, considering the elements such as their eligibility, rules and regulations, policies and procedures, and resource limitations. So I don't know about you guys, but as a director of financial aid, I review our policy every year based on what's happened in the year, what is gonna happen this next year, what worked this last year. About 3 years ago, when the state got rid of North Carolina legislative grant and the need-based scholarship on the private school side, and created the North Carolina need-based scholarship into one program, everybody had to really think about what they were doing, because the rules affected how much you could give. Before, one of those scholarships, you got your allocation based on your FTE, and then you could formulate your policy of what you were going to give to students, and you could give them up to a certain percentage of their tuition. Okay? Well, now there's a chart, and you can't deviate from the chart. So any flexibility within the family that needed just a little bit more to get them through is all gone. That funding can't be used for that anymore. So everybody had to totally reevaluate what they were doing because of that big change in the programs coming from North Carolina. We consider discount rates in a big way, because we know what we want our discount rate to be, and we know who our population is, and I know how many of them are going to be Pell recipients and how many are going to have over 50,000 ECs. I got it all broken down. I know based on each grid that we have to sign, I can project what we're going to do, so I know how to do our policy to make sure that we attract the right students that we want. We get them in the door and we get to retain them, and we know how much we need to spend to do that. And we were on the mark last year. So those are the kinds of things that your directors are thinking about here. The criteria is published. You publish how you choose your recipients. You pretty much have to publish your awarding guide, I call it, your policy. Now, I don't put every little bit of detail in there. I only put what I need to, but it's part of the consumer information I need to have. Okay? So, our objectives are to attract and retain students, distribute resources across student populations in fair and equitable ways. Depending on your school, there's different things to think about. We'll talk about that. Provide students sufficient resources to meet their needs. Want to make sure that you're providing what they need so they can come, or they're not going to be focused on school. They're going to be trying to figure out how they're going to survive while they're in school. And to help, each institution has some thoughts about what their self-help requirements should be. And they vary from school to school, but that's one of the things that your directors are thinking about with probably vice presidents. For me, I get some direction from what we call a president's council. All the vice presidents and a president, I get some directives there to help me come up with a proposed wording policy up here. So institutional priorities, once again, are considered. The cost of attendance is considered. That's one of the reasons why the calculation of your cost of attendance is so important. You really want to get that on the mark, or you started wrong from the very beginning. The length of your academic year needs to be considered in your policy. The student's year in college, academic major, additional available resources, and debt level. Consider that because we do report those in your iPads information and all of those U.S. News and World Report, Peterson Guide, all of those things that are out there for people to see. That information is important. So that is considered in what you're thinking about as an institution. And each program's statutory and regulatory requirements. So each awarding category or each award type, Pell, direct loans, SCOG, all of those rules need to be complied to in the policy too. You can't give someone SCOG that's not one of your needs students. You must make your campus-based funds reasonably available to all eligible students. So someone tell me, what are your campus-based funds? For study, Perkins and SCOG. Very good. So, if you need to make it reasonably available to all of your population, and all of your population goes to school fall and spring, you can just go ahead and award it till it's gone, neediest, earliest suppliers. probably okay, right? But what if you have rolling enrollment? Anybody have rolling enrollment? Or people that start new to your institution every 3 months or every month? Any non-Olins in here? No? Used to be? Yeah, nightmare, huh? Yeah, really hard. Well, let's say you have a school that not everyone goes in fall and spring. You have people that start once a semester or once a month. That's called rolling enrollment, when the rolling class starts. SEOG, for example, you wouldn't want to spend it all in your first 3 months. For those students, you need to budget it and have a certain amount allocated for each of those new start populations that you have. Okay? So that's what they're talking about when making awards reasonably available. Okay? And you would want to do that with work study and programs also. So that falls along with the designated sequence for awarding aid and applying consistency within the given categories. Must decide the amount of aid to award to students within applicable minimum and maximum limits established by the law. So you have to state within the SEOG can go up to what dollar amount for the year for a student? 4,000. Very good. So you can't go over that. So your policy has to be within, what is it for Perkins? Very good. Very good. Got it. 100. Not numbers. Pell Grants are always packaged first, and of course, because it's an entitlement, you don't adjust that. Other things would be adjusted first. And as I said a few minutes ago, a school is required to offer a reasonable proportion of SEOG, work study, and Perkins to less than full-time students also. I have known a school that gave SEOG only out-of-state students. Is that okay? No, it shouldn't be that way. Have to give it to the full population. Neediest and earliest appliers are often in the category that wing pieces where our students come fall and spring for the most part. But to just get to out-of-state students is categorizing a very specific population, and that's too restrictive according to the regulations. For purposes of this requirement, policies of exclusion for less than full-time or independent students is not acceptable. Part-time students include correspondence students, so you can't exclude your online programs. Reasonable proportions must be available to part-time students on eligible branch campuses. So I do have an institution that I know that has 4 branch campuses, and none of those students get SEOG. Now, they are in lower cost programs. And so often because of the policy, they're not eligible for it because the Pell covers most of it. But if you happen to have someone on that extended campus that meets the other requirements for SEOG, they can still have it. So you want to be able to show that in your policy you have it completely excluded. You know that there won't be very many that may be eligible. There might be some that aren't. So you don't want to exclude everybody. Some of you may not have that at all. Depends on how high your cost of attendance is, whether those things come into play. Questions so far? You must include the student's estimated Pell as estimated financial assistance when making your campus-based awards. So basically, you always will award Pell if they're eligible first, right? It's the first thing. And you must determine Pell eligibility before originating a sub or an unsubsidized staff group loan. I've never done that backwards. Does anyone have a scenario where they would do that in a different order? Must determine subsidized Stafford eligibility before originating an unsubsidized Stafford loan, which regulations say if they have subsidized loan eligibility, you have to do that first. And if you don't, then you're out of compliance as an institution. If the student is eligible for $200 or less of subsidized, you can give them just the unsubsidized. I choose not to do that. Anything I can get them subsidized, that's what I prefer. but that is part of the goal. I believe that these presentations were created from the handbook, is that correct?
Yes.
So anything that you have questions about, you want more detail, if you go to the references in the handbook for these slides, you'll see more detail. Because I looked to see, where is he getting all this? And it was almost exactly in the same order. Okay? The law establishes order of awarding SCOG based on the lowest DFCs with priority given to Pell Grant recipients. So here's the kicker. Let's say you're out of school. This happened to me at a school I worked at in South Dakota. All of our Pell students got SCOG, so then we could start awarding to students that were not Pell recipients that were our next easiest category. Does anybody have that experience? I had that in like 1990 or 91, and I haven't had that since. The other little tidbit I wanted to give you is, all of these campus-based funds have a match. Did they tell you that match can be done with funds besides other institutional funds? You might want to know that. You know what it is? Okay, don't forget that. That might come in handy to some of those reports. That's what we're doing. So SCOG has a 25% match. So you have 75% of it is federal, 25% is institutional. It can come from institutional awards. It doesn't have to be an exact match. So a lot of schools do institutional awards and put in that 25% match just as SCOG. So for an example, let's say a student has, I'm going to write on the board. Write on the board. So let's say the student, you guys are going to have to help me with the math because I don't know how to do it right. So to have Pell of, I'm just going to say 5,500 so the math is easy. SCOG, we'll give it all to them. And then a presidential scholarship of 12,000. Okay, so this 4,000 is 75% federal, and you can use that as the 25%.
The scholarship.
And all you have to do is show your auditors how you came up with that match out of your institutional scholarships. So some schools do that. My administration's always really happy when I do that. So I've saved them a little money, and then we can use that money for a different category if we want to. Because SCOG's restrictions don't always match up. They are a little bit too restrictive sometimes. Sometimes there's another need that we find as an institution is more pressing than another. Okay? That's in the handbook. In your policy, you also need to define exceptional need for federal perkins loans. So most schools say EFCs between 0 and 4,000 are the need students, and they can have this dollar amount. And if a student still has need over 4,000, they can have up to this amount. However, you all need to do that depending on how much money you have to work in the program. Make sense? Am I making you think? I hope so. So, 7 packaging models. I didn't even know there were 7. And here we are. Individual basis, packaging based on individual needs, costs, and resources. How many of you would do that? I think a really small school might do that, but not very many. First come, first served. Awards are made as applications are received until the funds are exhausted. Generally inappropriate for SCOG. Specialized or target groups, aid distributed based on special criteria. Not appropriate for awarding federal funds unless under federal statute like SCOG. Latter concept, all applications treated equally, EFC and outside resources subtracted from cost of attendance. Grants and scholarships are awarded first, and then self-help. Some of you are using that. The next one, self-help concept is very similar to the one we just did. or we're talking about treats, applications.